This is the Autobiography of St Ignatius, written by St Ignatius Loyola, edited by J.F.X. O'Connor, S.J., narrated by Don Gentry. Editor's Preface. This account of the life of St Ignatius, dictated by himself, is considered by the Bollandists the most valuable record of the great founder of the Society of Jesus. The editors of the Stimmen aus Maria Lach, the German Review, as well as those of the English magazine The Month, tell us that it, more than any other work, gives an insight into the spiritual life of St Ignatius. Few works in ascetical literature, except the writings of St Teresa and St Augustine, impart such a knowledge of the soul. To understand fully the spiritual exercises, we should know something of the man who wrote them. In this life of St Ignatius, told in his own words, we acquire an intimate knowledge of the author of the exercises. We discern the saint's natural disposition, which was the foundation of his spiritual character. We learn of his conversion, his trials, the obstacles in his way, the heroism with which he accomplished his great mission. This autobiography of St Ignatius is the groundwork of all the great lives of him that have been written. Bartoli draws from it, Ginelli develops it, the recent magnificent works of Father Clare S.J. and of Stuart Rose are amplifications of this simple story of the life of St Ignatius. The saint in his narrative always refers to himself in the third person, and this mode of speech has here been retained. Many persons who have neither the time nor perhaps the inclination to read larger works will read, we trust, with pleasure and profit from this autobiography. Ignatius, as he lay wounded in his brother's house, read the lives of the saints to while away the time. Touched by grace, he cried, "What St. Francis and St. Dominic have done, that, by God's grace, I will do." May this little book, in like manner, inspire its readers with the desire of imitating St. Ignatius. The Editor. Easter, 1900. College of St. Francis Xavier, New York. Preface of Father Louis Gonzalez, S.J., to the Acts of St. Ignatius, received from the lips of the saint and translated into Latin by Father Hannibal Codretto, S.J. Preface of the Writer. Jesus, Mary, in the year 1553, one Friday evening, August 4, the eve of the feast of Our Lady of the Snows, while St. Ignatius was in the garden, I began to give him an account of my soul, and, among other things, I spoke to him of how I was tempted by vain glory. The spiritual advice he gave me was this: refer everything that you do to God. Strive to offer Him all the good you find in yourself, acknowledging that this comes from God, and thank Him for it. The advice given to me on this occasion was so consoling to me that I could not refrain from tears. St. Ignatius then related to me that for 2 years he had struggled against vain glory, so much so indeed that when he was about to embark for Jerusalem at Barcelona, he did not dare to tell anyone where he was going. He told me, moreover, that since that time his soul had experienced great peace in regard to this matter. An hour or two later we went to dinner, and while Master Polancus and I were dining with him, St. Ignatius said that Master Natalis and others of the society had often asked him to give a narrative of his life, but he had never as yet decided to do so. On this occasion, however, after I had spoken to him, he reflected upon it alone. He was favorably inclined toward it. From the way he spoke, it was evident God had enlightened him. He had resolved to manifest the main points of his interior life up to the present, and had concluded that I was the one to whom he would make these things known. At that time St. Ignatius was in very feeble health. He did not promise himself 1 day of life, but, on the contrary, if anyone were to say, "I shall do that within 2 weeks or a week," St. Ignatius was accustomed to say, "How is that? Do you think you are going to live that long?" However, on this occasion he said he hoped to live 3 or 4 months to finish the narrative. The next day, when I asked him when he wished to begin, he answered that I should remind him every day until he had an opportunity for it. As he could not find time, partly on account of his many occupations, he told me to remind him of it every Sunday. In the following September he called me, and began to relate his whole life clearly and distinctly, with all the accompanying circumstances. Afterward, in the same month, he called me 3 or 4 times and told me the history of his life up to the time of his dwelling at Manresa. The method followed by St. Ignatius is so clear that he places vividly before our eyes the events of the past. It was not necessary to ask him anything, as nothing important was omitted. I began to write down certain points immediately, and I afterward filled out the details. I endeavored to write
Sample complete. Ready to continue?